Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome to my channel. As you guys can see from the title I'll be putting up today, I will be going over some of my initial preliminary thoughts about this book, When Christ and His Saints Slept by Sharon Kay Penman. This is the first of 5 books in a medieval historical fiction series about the Plantagenet Dynasty in England and France. She's written a couple of other medieval historical series as well as some medieval historical mysteries, and I believe she's also written some standalone books. So basically, like, this is her world. She totally lives and breathes medieval history. And I looked up a couple of reviews on it online before I started reading. They were really, really good. One person on Reddit said it inspired them to get a degree in medieval history. Other people said, oh, I've read this book multiple times. Oh, it's not only one of my favorite books about medieval history, it's my favorite book of all time, and it's so intense and rich in world building. So yeah, I was prepared to totally love it, and the prologue seemed really, really promising. But then when I start getting into it, there's a couple of weaknesses. I mean, some of these, admittedly, they're more tied to an older kind of style of writing. I fully admit some of these issues I myself, I had them, and I didn't realize, oh, that's not how writers are encouraged to do things anymore. And so I basically had to unlearn what I came to realize were bad, outdated habits that don't really immerse the person fully in the world. But I was prepared to really like it, and it's just not really living up so much to my expectations, but I'm not ready to DNF it just yet. The synopsis on the back: AD 1135. As church bells toll for the death of England's King Henry I, his barons face the unwelcome prospect of being ruled by a woman. Oh no, it's a horrible prospect. Henry's beautiful daughter Maud, although historically she's called Matilda in all of the sources I've seen. I'm not sure why Ms. Penman insists on calling her Maud when by all indication that really wasn't her name. Countess of Anjou. But before Maud can claim her throne, her cousin Stephen seizes it. In their long and bitter struggle, all of England will bleed and burn. This period of history is known as the Anarchy. Sharon Kay Penman's splendid novel summons to life a spectacular medieval tragedy whose unfolding breaks the heart, even as it prepares the way for splendors to come, the glorious age of Eleanor of Aquitaine and the Plantagenets that would soon illumine the world. The prologue starts promisingly enough, as I previously mentioned, in January 1101, when Stephen is celebrating his 5th birthday, because that's when his father goes away. His mother, Adela, she comes across as a total piece of work. His dad, also named Stephen, had served bravely, nobly, honorably in the Crusades, and he came back, and Adela is angry. How dare you not do even more battles? You're not manly enough for me. You need to go back and prove yourself again and again, and even if you get KIA, that's not good enough for me. And they have a little fight in the church when Stephen is eavesdropping, and here's some infodumpy dialogue when Stephen Sr. is telling Stephen Jr. what exactly happened in the past, because of course you always talk to a 5-year-old in great detail about military strategy and politics and history. And Stephen Sr. is saying don't send me back to die, woman. Didn't I already do my duty to God and empire? I'm not sending you back to die, Stephen, but to redeem your honor. You owe your sons that, and you owe me that. You must fulfill your crusader's vow. If not, you'll live out all your days haunted by the shame of Antioch. And in a huge piece of, as you know, Bob dialogue, Stephen Sr. says, I'd hoped to wait until you were older. When I was in the Holy Land, I made a mistake. It did not seem so at the time. It was, though, the greatest mistake of my life. We'd been besieging Antioch for nigh on 8 months. I'd been taken ill with fever, had withdrawn to nearby Alexandretta. The day after I left, our forces captured the city, but then a large Saracen army arrived and trapped them within Antioch. They seemed doomed for certes, and I chose to go home, back to Blois. He paused, ruffling Stephen's hair, the same tawny shade as his own, before resuming reluctantly. But the Crusaders besieged in Antioch were saved by a miracle. You see, lad, she loves the word lad and lass, they found an ancient lance in one of Antioch's churches, supposedly revealed in a vision from God. Whether this was truly the holy lance that had pierced our Lord Christ on the cross or not, what matters is that men believed it to be so. They marched out of Antioch to confront the Saracen army, and against all odds won a great victory. So Antioch was spared, and I I was shamed for all of Christendom. What I saw as common sense, seen by others as cowardice, and like things seem to go well. Stephen's like father survives when he goes back to fight in more crusades, but then he like takes ill on the way home, and like Stephen Jr. is so angry at his mother. You did this to Dad. How could you, Mama? And they just really have a difficult relationship. So anyway, it seems like she's setting up Stephen to be the main character by the prologue, and of course like it makes sense she's going to begin like sometime later, November 1120, when Stephen is an adult beginning his story in earnest. But no, when Stephen is in the first proper chapter, but he's not really the main character in this. We're introduced to some young butcher from Rouen. I'm sorry if that mispronouncing that, in France. Berold. Now, Berold is based on a real person, the real-life only survivor of the White Ship disaster that did happen in November 1120 when it was crossing the English Channel. Tragically, King Henry I's only legitimate son, Prince William, was killed in that. He had been put in a boat with some sailors and other people. They felt, oh, horrible, the ship is going to sink. We have to save the heir to the throne above anyone else on board. And they get William in, and the boat is starting to take on water, the lifeboat. And William insists, we have to go back to save my half-sister, also named Matilda, though she's called Mahalt in the book. Like, why is she not calling people by their actual names? Did she think they would be confused by too many Matildas? Stephen's wife is also a Matilda. And so anyway, disaster strikes when William forces the guys rescuing him to go back into the ship, and it's just horrible. Every single person on board died except for this young butcher from Rouen. But anyway, why did she spend like so much time setting him up as a main character and talking about his story, interacting with Stephen, and how like a pretty much a nobody came to be on board a ship that was carrying like royals and nobles across the channel? If like he's never mentioned again in the entire book, according to other reviewers. So like, why do this? Why not just mention Stephen's role in witnessing this? Oh, he was on another ship making the crossing at the same time with a couple of other people, including some like fictional characters, other illegitimate royal bastards who were, on that other ship. But no, she just focuses on a completely like fictionalized version of a real person whom we never see again. Like, just writers are taught not to do this these days. Like, don't spend all this time and effort like setting up characters and storylines if they play zero role in the entire rest of the book. I even did that when I was like, rewriting some of my other books. Okay, these are going to be important like secondary characters throughout the book, but I'm just introducing them like way too early because they don't show up again and become like really important to the storyline or the other characters' lives until like, chapter 3 or whatever. So just don't like introduce them until they become important to the storyline. And she does this like again in the third, not the third chapter, I'm thinking of the prologue, the second chapter. Oh, we've skipped ahead to August 1829. Wow, all that time skipped. Like, that's another thing. There are multiple times there are years or months between chapters. And I do realize, like, being a saga writer myself, like when you're like deliberately spanning many years, even like 10 plus years, and there are like, it's a large ensemble cast, you don't necessarily always need to jump right from one time to the next. So like the chapter shouldn't always necessarily begin within like, days of the previous chapter ending. No, but like skipping like 9 years or 2 years or whatever between chapters, like what is the purpose of that? Why not just spend time like slowly, languidly developing the characters and the storyline? Or if like what they're doing isn't particularly that important to the story you want to tell yet, just start it like later in their lives, or like better yet, make a separate book for their lives leading up to this, like their coming of age or like machinations behind the scenes. Don't just skip 9 years skipped, 2 years skipped, 5 years skipped, 5 months skipped, like 2 months skipped, instead of just like this should have been paced a lot better. And so anyway, now we're in August 1129, city of Angers, province of Anjou, France. So we're introduced to a 13-year-old girl named Barb, who is running away to her older sister Marthe, who's classily introduced as a whore, like aka a prostitute. And like Barb just wants to avoid her stepmother and her like father. They're just horrible people. So anyway, Barb and Marthe are never mentioned again throughout the course of the book. And Marthe has now gotten the new prostitute named Mirabelle. So, and the only purpose of either of these two characters being there is because the Prince Geoffrey is there, and he's unhappily married to Matilda, who's called Maud in this book, even though that was not her like real actual historical name. Oh, Geoffrey is visiting hookers because he's like unsatisfied with his much older wife. Like, I can't really like blame him or anyone for feeling that way. Matilda was originally married to Holy Roman Emperor Heinrich V. They only had one child who sadly only lived a very short time. But so anyway, like after she's widowed and she is brought back to England by her father, King Henry I, he wants to make her his heir. And that's like, people are up in arms. Wow, a woman ruling us, but they're the inferior sex. So who ever heard of a queen in her own right? And so he has to have like an equally ranked partner for Matilda to marry, and he settles upon Geoffrey, who's like 14 at their marriage to Matilda's 25. Like, gross. I mean, I realize like age gaps to a certain extent, only certain age gaps at certain ages were a little bit less pronounced than they might be in the modern era back in the day. So for example, like whereas like normal people hopefully in the modern era would be like grossed out by like a 15-year-old girl like marrying a 21-year-old like man, but in the Middle Ages, I don't really think that would be such a big like age gap, because they would be like relatively at the same, experience level and type of like maturity in their lives, versus like in the 21st century. Of course, that's, totally gross, or like a 16-year-old girl marrying a 24-year-old man in like, the 1800s, something like that. That wouldn't really be such a big deal. But like a 14-year-old boy and a 25-year-old woman, even in the Middle Ages, that's really creepy. Like, no wonder they're like incompatible in bed, and people are still saying, oh, Matilda, you suck. Like, how can you not even satisfy like a beautiful young man in the prime of his like sexuality? That it must be you. And they have a very like unhappy marriage, and Geoffrey is even beating his much older wife, and she decides to, ditch him and leave him. And of course she's blamed, because like women never leave their husbands. It must be your fault. You should have learned to put up with him hitting you, or you should do more to satisfy him in bed. You're totally a loser if you can't like keep a young teenage boy happy. You should be the mature older woman of the world and know what to do. And oh, you're not getting pregnant. It must totally be your fault. And so again, then we skip to February 1133 for the third chapter. Like, so again, like skipping between like times and places, and Matilda is still like talking about how she hates her like marriage. Oh, and guess what? By the time we've skipped ahead 2 years to this next chapter, Matilda and Geoffrey have reconciled, gotten back together, and Matilda is pregnant. So that's kind of a really, really like huge chunk of events to just leave out of a book. Like who does that? Like, oh yeah, oh, they were like getting divorced or doing a separation, but oh, it wouldn't be approved by the church because you don't meet these like very specific like circumstances for having an approved annulment or divorce back in the Middle Ages in like Catholic Europe. So no, they're just gonna like skip over like how did they get back together? Why did they get back together? When did they get back together? Like the getting pregnant thing, the happy announcement. No, just gonna skip over it. All that conveniently was resolved off of the pages in the 2 years between these chapters. And here's again, and she does a lot of telling instead of showing, like this happened, then that happened, name did this, name said that, name felt this, name felt that. Infodumpy dialogue. As you know, Bob, when I was fighting in the Holy Land, and this terrible thing happened at Antioch, and I was shamed before all of Christendom, and oh, this person is unhappily married to that person, and oh, and this is going on. Like, oh yeah, like prostitutes are totally in the know about like royal gossip and politics back in the day. Here's another, as you know, Bob, type of dialogue between the sisters Barb and Mart, who never come up again in this entire book, like blah, blah, blah. As you know, Bob, as you know, Bob, as you know, Bob. So she's basically telling her sister all of this like info dumpy gossip that really could have been conveyed in a much better way. Either tell us in the narrative, like third person omniscient voice, not in a dialogue, or just like work it into, both narrative and dialogue as it, comes up, as it, is relevant, or show us in world building. Don't just, oh, dump it on, dump it on. As you know, Bob, I was just getting to that. You see, Barb, the king of Jerusalem, faced the same predicament as the English king. No son to succeed him. Oh, noes. His eldest daughter was to be queen and was in need of a husband. And so it was arranged for Count Fulk to take her to wife. As king of Jerusalem, he could well afford to cede Anjou to Geoffrey, so the lady Maud, Matilda, would at least be marrying a count. And indeed, it all came to pass, as the English king would have it. Geoffrey and Maud were wed last year, 2 months before his 15th birthday, in a magnificent ceremony at Le Mans. Count Fulk later departed for the Holy Land in his new destiny. The English king returned contentedly to his own domains, and the war began. Oh, and she's like doing even more info-dumpy dialogue. This isn't how you like immerse readers into your world. And by the way, I can't really feel myself like drawn into any characters, maybe Stephen a little bit because he's the first one introduced and he does get more page time so far than the others, but it's really hard to get into these like events and characters and settings when we don't really spend much time with any, for like any length of time. We're just jumping ahead to the next, setting or scene or characters in the next chapter after a couple of years, and it's really head hopping. I mean, I've been guilty of this myself in the past. I was too omniscient. I still do third person omniscient, but I try, so hard now to just keep to one perspective in the same scene, or like gradually shift to like another important person in that section of the book instead of I'm in Henry's head. Then the very next paragraph, I'm in Geoffrey's head, and within that same paragraph, now I'm in Maud's head, and now I'm in this person's head, and now I'm in a completely other person's head, instead of just settling on one person to be the point of view character for that entire scene or, section of the book. And another great example of, telling instead of showing, Maud went to Geoffrey's bedchamber as soon as she was dressed, and was angered and disconcerted to discover that his bed had not been slept in. If he did not return from his nocturnal hunting within the next few hours, his continued absence would become known to all in the castle, for there could be no other explanation for his failure to appear at dinner. So, why not just show her coming upon the bed and, discovering it wasn't slept in, and actually, her body language, or muttering under her breath, or, cursing at Geoffrey, whatever, just to show us she discovered the bed wasn't slept in, and show us she was angry and disconcerted. You don't just say the character was angry. And that's, I think, what led many people back in the day, and many people still, to say adverbs are evil, don't ever use them. Adverbs themselves aren't evil, but it's when you overuse the adverbs, or you rely on them as lazy, weak crutches to convey emotions and what characters are feeling. So name said angrily, name asked exasperatedly, Mrs. Johnson screamed excitedly, or, Mary whispered quizzically, or just something like that. It's just lazy writing. Just so tell us, show us what the characters are actually going through, and don't just impassionately tell us. And it just really so far feels like a collection of vignettes and short stories that are at most loosely connected, because they're not just following one after the other. We're just jumping to entirely different settings and storylines and characters throughout each chapter. And a lot of people have mentioned the most interesting character in the book by far is a fictional person, or at least a fictionalized version of a possible real person, Ranulf, who was one of the many acknowledged extramarital, or as they would say in traditional times, illegitimate children of King Henry I by a 30 years younger Welsh woman, Angarad, who is brought back as war booty when she's not much older than 15 years old. Again, kind of gross, but people did view huge age gaps a little bit differently back in the day, even though most couples historically were about 1 to 6 years apart, maybe up to 10 years apart sometimes, but usually 30 years wasn't normal. But anyway, kings had completely different rules for their mistresses and wives. But so it really is telling that one of the most interesting characters in this book isn't even a historical figure. It's a totally fictionalized person with his own stories and adventures. Thank you very much for watching all the way through to the end. Please let me know down in the comments, have you ever read this book or any of Ms. Penman's other books? What do you think of medieval historical fiction? Do you like doorstoppers? Would you be annoyed with a book full of, as you know, Bob, info-dumpy dialogue and narrative passages? What do you think when books just skip ahead huge chunks of time between each chapter? What do you think when they just like head hop along or make a big show of introducing characters who never appear again as though they're going to be integral to the storyline or have like some like really hot button relevance to the main characters and storylines like later on? I do understand to some extent, being a historical writer myself, when you're like writing a story set over a really long period of time with like many characters, and like when you're like they're living through history, sometimes that is the story, and so it is like necessarily more like episodic, and instead of like, oh, this is what name wants, and this is how it's going to happen, and this is exactly the antagonist, and this is A, B, C. So sometimes a historical book is more about, living through the history when the history becomes the storyline, but you should still have like actual like storylines with the characters independent of, oh, we're living through World War II, or we're going on the Oregon Trail, or we're living through the anarchy in medieval England and France. Like, so you shouldn't just like, have an episodic structure just skipping around like that. It just feels like there should have been a much better editor for this book. But again, I'm rambling. So thank you guys again very much for watching, and let me know what you think of this book or what I have described of it, and I will see you soon. Bye.